Welcome to the deep dive. So, you've probably bumped into some discussions online, right? Maybe seen a video or two floating around
Uh-huh.
about some, well, potentially really big shifts in South Africa's constitution.
Yeah, definitely seeing that buzz.
Today, we're not just, scrolling past. We're going to properly dig into some key changes being talked about, changes that have really sparked a lot of public conversation.
And much of that thanks to some very engaged citizens, particularly one content creator sharing their thoughts.
Exactly. So what we're seeing is, well, it's quite something. Public chat, really amplified online, has put the spotlight on the annual review of the Constitution.
Right. And our goal here in this deep dive is to get a handle on the actual amendments being proposed, the sort of thinking behind them, and maybe what it says about how people are engaging with their own foundational laws.
Okay, so let's unpack that momentum. How did this get so big? It started with the call for public comment on the review, didn't it?
That was the trigger. Yeah, the annual call went out. But then Princima Mthombeni, she's a content creator, started sharing her initial thoughts.
Yeah.
Use TikTok, other platforms.
And that just took off.
It really seemed to resonate. Her initial ideas, posted online, clearly struck a chord. It wasn't just like random thoughts. It tapped into something already there,
Feelings people already had.
Exactly. And then it became, well, really collaborative. People gave feedback, commented, and that feedback directly shaped proposals.
So it wasn't just her ideas alone.
No, it evolved. It became this petition pulling together public input. It really shows a strong desire for citizens to actually drive these kinds of changes.
Yeah, absolutely. A collective thing. Really underlines that people want more direct say, doesn't it?
It does.
So let's get down to the nitty-gritty then. What are these specific proposals? One big area is safety and justice, I gather.
That's a major one. The proposal here is for a constitutional amendment to allow the death penalty.
Wow, okay. For specific crimes.
Yes, for a very specific list of what they term heinous crimes. Things like serial murder, armed robbery where someone dies, treason, femicide, serial rape, aggravated child abuse.
A heavy list.
Extremely. The reasoning given links back to the constitutional right to life.
How so?
The argument is, essentially, that when certain individuals repeatedly and brutally violate that fundamental right, especially repeat offenders, well, maybe a different response is needed. It's a justification based on protecting the rights of victims and potential future victims. Of course, globally, the debate on the death penalty, its effectiveness, its ethics, it's huge and deeply divided.
It's incredibly complex, isn't it? That tension between rights, safety, justice for victims. Really tough. Okay, shifting gears a bit. What about how the country's run? Governance. There are proposals there too.
Yes, quite significant ones. A key idea is changing how the president is elected.
Oh!
Moving to direct election by the people, by the citizens, instead of the current system where the National Assembly picks the president.
Right. And the thinking there is?
More democratic legitimacy, basically. Making the president directly accountable to voters, not just the party majority in parliament.
Makes sense. Anything else on that front?
There's also a proposed age limit for the president, capped at 65 years old.
65, that's specific. Any reason given?
The source material doesn't spell out the exact why for 65. But generally, arguments for age limits often talk about, ensuring leaders have the necessary energy, maybe bringing in fresh perspectives. Though the flip side is potentially losing experienced leaders. It's always a debate.
True. And what about interacting with government? Anything there?
Yes, another big one for accountability. A call for a legally enforceable right for citizens to petition Parliament.
Meaning?
Meaning if you petition Parliament, they have to respond. It wouldn't just be advisory. It would create a formal, guaranteed feedback loop.
That could really strengthen the connection between people and Parliament, couldn't it? Make them more responsive.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
More direct line.
Okay, so moving from governance structure, what about resources? Who gets what? There are ideas about that too.
Yeah, this falls under what you might call citizen-centric policy. The core idea is simple. Prioritize South African citizens when distributing public resources.
Which resources are we talking about?
The proposal lists things like housing, healthcare, food, water, social security, jobs, education, basically essential services and support.
And how would they change the Constitution to do that?
The specific suggestion is pretty direct. Find the parts of the Constitution that talk about access to these resources, where it currently says everyone, and change everyone to citizens.
That's quite a change. What would the impact be?
Well, it could significantly affect how non-citizens access those state-provided services and resources.
So the thinking behind it is like the state's first duty is to its own citizens, especially if resources are tight.
That seems to be the main argument, yeah. That the government's primary responsibility is to meet the needs of South Africans first, given the, significant socioeconomic challenges.
Definitely raises some big questions about fairness, inclusion, how you define community.
It certainly does. It's a debate with potentially very real consequences on the ground.
Okay. Let's move on to economic justice and this idea of national ownership. What's being proposed?
Several things here kind of linked. First, tweaking the preamble, the intro bit of the Constitution.
Oh.
See state very clearly. South Africa belongs to all its citizens, united in our diversity. And adding that sovereignty, ultimate power, rests with the people. It's about reinforcing that idea.
Okay, reinforcing national unity and popular control. What else?
Then there's natural resources. The proposal calls for stricter regulation, building on Chapter 13, which deals with state finances.
Right.
To make sure the benefits from things like minerals, are shared more equitably among all citizens.
That sounds pretty significant for a resource-rich country.
It could be. There's also a mention of NGOs, non-governmental organizations.
What about them?
The idea that they should operate in ways that support national development goals, kind of aligning their work with national priorities.
Interesting. And anything else on the economic front?
Yes, and this one's quite striking given the unemployment situation. Proposing a constitutional right and duty to work.
A right and a duty. What does that mean in practice?
Well, the right part suggests an entitlement, maybe pushing the state towards creating jobs. The proposal mentions exploring state-supported job creation.
So the government potentially taking a much bigger role in employment.
That seems to be the implication, yes. A potentially major shift in the state's economic role.
Okay, wow, lots to think about there. Finally then, what about how we vote? Electoral system changes.
Right, electoral and institutional reform. The main idea is to shift away from the current system, which is purely proportional representation, or PR.
Okay, what would replace it?
A hybrid system. The proposal suggests half the seats in Parliament would still be filled through PR, keeping that broad representation of parties.
And the other half?
The other half would be elected directly from constituencies, like specific geographic areas electing their own MP.
Ah, so trying to get the best of both worlds.
Right.
Broad party representation and local accountability.
That's the stated goal, yeah.
Oh.
Ensuring diverse political voices are heard, but also creating that stronger link between an MP and the specific community they represent.
Okay, so when you step back and look at all these proposals together, what's the common thread? What are the big themes driving this?
Well, a few things really stand out. There's a clear push for greater democratic legitimacy, making sure the government truly represents the people's will. Accountability is huge, holding elected officials responsible from the president down.
Right.
And then a really strong focus on citizen welfare.
Right.
Prioritizing South Africans in policy and resource allocation.
And underlying it all.
I think it's this fundamental idea that the Constitution isn't set in stone. It should be a living document, something that can change and adapt as the country's needs and the people's aspirations evolve.
It definitely sounds like a citizenry wanting to be more involved, using the Constitution as the tool.
Absolutely.
So for listeners who are hearing this and maybe these ideas resonate or they want to know more, what can they do? Okay,
crucial bit of info. The window for public comment on this constitutional review is open, but it closes. The deadline is May 31st, 2025.
Right, so there's a deadline.
Yes, and if you want to follow these specific proposals closely, Princey Muthombeni's online channels are probably the place to go for updates. She's continuing the discussion there.
Okay.
But more importantly, if you, the listener, have thoughts on these ideas or maybe completely different ideas about the Constitution, now is the time. You can submit your own comments through the official parliamentary channels. Your voice matters in this process.
Definitely. So this has been, well, a really fascinating look at some potentially huge changes being driven by public discussion by engaged citizens.
It really has. And it leaves us and you listening with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it? When you think about all these proposed changes, these different areas, what single part of South Africa's constitution do you think has the most power, the most potential to really shape the nation's future?
That's a great question. Something to really reflect on that role every citizen can play in shaping governance.
Exactly. Keep thinking, keep engaging.
If you could change just one thing in South Africa's constitution, what would it be? Take a moment, think about it, because right now, Parliament is actually asking you to speak up. Let's talk about it. Hi guys, my name is Prince Mtombeni Umaduma, a founder of Africa for Nuclear. The Constitutional Review Committee is reviewing the Constitution, and they are calling for public input before the 31st of May 2025. So this is our chance to be heard, guys. I've spent the whole day reviewing the Constitution, and I want to share my reviews with you. But most importantly, I want to know what you think. So now what my reviews are. Number 1, preamble revision. It currently says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. My proposed revision: South Africa belongs to all its citizens, united in our diversity. And the rationale: legal and political ownership should rest with citizens while upholding human dignity and inclusion for others through rights-based frameworks. Number 2, direct presidential elections. Section 86. It currently says the National Assembly must elect the president from among its members. My proposed revision: South Africans should elect their own president by popular vote, separate from the National Assembly. And the rationale: this will enhance democratic legitimacy, accountability, and give power directly to the people. Number 3, the People's Sovereignty Clause in Chapter 1, Founding Provisions. I hereby propose the following edition: the sovereignty of South Africa resides in the people, and all states' authority emanates from the people. This affirms the foundational principle of democracy, that government exists to serve the will of the people. Number 4, the right to education. Section 29. It currently says everyone has the right to a basic education, including adult basic education. No. This is what I propose. All citizens have the right to a basic education, including adult basic education. While South Africa should remain compassionate and supportive, priority should be given to citizens, especially when public resources are limited. Access for foreign nationals may be addressed under separate immigration or humanitarian policies, not as a constitutional right. No. Now, let's review Section 26, access to housing. Everyone has the right to have access to adequate housing. No. It should be all South African citizens have the right to access to adequate housing. The provision of housing is a major socio-economic challenge in South Africa. So, given the limited resources and the increasing housing demand, the Constitution must clearly prioritize citizens. Yes, foreign nationals may be accommodated under immigration policy, but when it comes to resource allocation, citizen welfare must come first. Same goes for Section 27, access to healthcare, food, water, and social security. It currently says everyone has the right to have access to healthcare services, including reproductive healthcare, sufficient food, blah, blah, blah. No. This is what I propose. All South African citizens have the right to have access to healthcare services, including reproductive healthcare, sufficient food, and so forth. Guys, I don't even have to explain this. You all know public health services in South Africa are under severe strain. Now, I propose that we strengthen Section 23, the right and duty to work, which currently talks about the right to fair labor practices. So I propose the following edition, and I'm going to read it for you. All citizens shall have the right to work. The state shall endeavor to promote the employment of workers and to guarantee optimum wages through social and economic means. A. B. All citizens shall have the duty to work, and the state shall prescribe by act the extent and conditions of this duty in conformity with democratic principles and human dignity. Currently, Section 23 focuses on labor rights and union protections, but it lacks an explicit constitutional guarantee of the right to employment and the state's responsibility in fostering economic participation. So the new clause reinforces that employment is both a right and a responsibility of citizens. It also empowers the state to take an active role in creating job opportunities. Now, my last review. I want us to beef up Section 17, right to petition. It currently says everyone has the right, unarmed and peacefully, to assemble, to demonstrate, to picket, and present petitions. And this is what I propose, and I'm going to read it for you. All citizens have the right to petition in writing to any governmental agency or organ. The state shall be obligated to examine all such petitions and to respond within a reasonable period as prescribed by the law. While Section 17 acknowledges the right to present petitions, however, it doesn't establish a formal and enforceable right to petition the state in writing. It also doesn't establish a corresponding obligation for government to review, consider, or even respond to those petitions. This video is long, I'm so sorry guys, but please submit your comments before the 31st of May 2025 using the information and email address on this flyer. Share your thoughts in the comments, tag someone who needs to hear this, and thank you so much for watching.
For heinous crimes such as the people should be the one that are selecting the president instead of proportional representation. If you're not aware, Parlamente insiste a call for comment the annual review of our constitution Komzansi, and this is our supreme law, so get top shayela of all our laws. The other day, Prince Mtombeni ula posta mogo TikTok aro huputsa ka yona ntwenu, but also ula tsamaya yena lo checka constitution are jwetsa hore what are her recommended changes. So people started sending her a lot of messages, but also I started getting a lot of messages about her video, and then I thought about my own changes. So we hopped on a call, and what culminated from that is the petition that you now see in the bio. So before anything, tsamaya uye go petitioning in the bio, we complete it because it now aims to consolidate all our efforts, and we tried our best to think of the changes we thought of, but also the changes that people had recommended and people still continue to send. So let's summarize it. What are we proposing within that petition? We decided to split it into 5 broad categories, and I'm just going to highlight a very brief overview, otherwise I'll be here forever. The first category we spoke about is safety and justice. For heinous crimes such as serial murder, armed robbery with fatal outcomes, treason, femicide, serial rape, aggravated child abuse, because the Bill of Rights says we all have a right to life. But what happens when that right to life is violated by a selected minority and there's repeated offenders? Then number 2, Ribuaka, accountable governance. And this is where we say the people should be the one that are selecting the president and not a parliament. And we also saying there must be a term limit. 65 years, and also public enforceable right to petition must have a guaranteed response for parliament, because as it stands, but there is no obligation for them to respond. And then the third one is citizen-centric policy and resource allocation. Just to say, all the resources that provide government, just like housing, healthcare, food, water, social security, employment and labor opportunities, including education, the citizens of the country must take precedence and number 1 and ultimate right. So it says general review to replace everyone with citizens where public resources are concerned. And then Yabuifoki, economic justice as well as national ownership. And this is to amend the preamble. South Africa belongs to all its citizens, united in our diversity, but also to add the context here, sovereignty of South Africa, that it resides with the people. It also speaks about regulation of natural resources for equitable national benefit, and this is addressing chapter 13 of the Constitution. And then also to say the NGO, LIDI, MPO should actually be supporting national development and national priorities. And also to affirm the right and duty to work, including state-supported employment creation, because as it stands, our unemployment rate is very high. But Parliament, and we say let's just hold somebody accountable for that. And then the last part is the electoral and institutional reform, where we talk about Instead of proportional representation, let's have a hybrid system where half of parliament is proportional representation and another half is direct constituency election, so that batho ba seng batho le dipolitiki, they also find expression in parliament. Then we say our constitution is a living document. It should evolve with the needs of the people and the demands of modern sovereign South Africa. So, Luna, what are your recommended changes? Kupale share in the comments section, and also uskaleba kupalo sign a petition, because harilebaka then singakwazi ukufaka pressure.